Hey guys, what is up? Coming to you Patreon exclusive in September of 2018. I'm going to share this with the general public about 1 year later. But if you're watching this a year later or 10 years later, I just note this anecdote is in some ways uniquely September of 2018 in its context. Way back in September of 2018, which is right now, if you're supporting the channel for $1 a month on Patreon, and thank you, we participated in street outreach, public education, sidewalk activism in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And the first person who walked up to me and talked to me at this event was in fact a communist or possibly an anti-capitalist, anarchist, or anarcho-communist, something of that kind. So this video is primarily going to be relating that anecdote, this conversation I had to you, with a few more reflections on this particular style of vegan outreach or activism. So for myself, overall, this was a positive experience. This is a very small group that organized the event. It's ultimately one man's organization, as so often the case with vegan activism. And it does not directly reflect the methods used by Cube of Truth or the Earthlings Experience. The founder and coordinator and organizer of this group, he was a former employee of Mercy for Animals, and he'd seen what the other groups were doing in terms of street activism and outreach, and in some ways his method is a bit of a creative response to the advantages and disadvantages of other methods. So just as I suggested on this channel some time ago, instead of having people standing silently wearing masks and holding up video monitors, he simply bought a metal rack the video monitors are mounted on. And the video monitors he purchased to display the slaughterhouse footage, they are commercial grade. They're the type of monitor used for public advertising, not for, using your computer at home to do word processing. So they are much brighter, and the image carries further down the sidewalk. Whereas, if you're holding a laptop computer, that's a type of display monitor screen. That's a type of screen really designed for people to sit up close to it. So there are some strategic differences here already. And the other big one in terms of the psychology and attitude of the participants, there's nobody having, I think, the denigrating experience of standing in silence with the mask on. Now, different people do tell me different things about that experience of having the mask on. And the main thing I'm going to talk about in this video is that different people have different perspectives on the experience of doing the face-to-face conversation and outreach that this type of activism entails. That's very different for different psychological types of people. It probably also is different based on your physical appearance. Sad but true in this world. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But, I've had some people tell me that they really do appreciate and enjoy the experience of standing in silence with a mask on and seeing the look in other people's eyes, seeing the reaction, silently when they come over and look at the monitor. I can understand that. But I do sometimes have people telling me, yes, they really do experience this as a somewhat oppressive and hierarchical experience where some people at this event are being assigned to stand with the mask on and some are not, that they can't stand the process of, after 2 hours of standing in silence, they got to move around or do something or go to the bathroom, or that it drives them crazy, that they really feel awful about it, and that there are little power struggles for who gets to talk and who has to stand there in silence, who's in charge, who's going to be a silent peon and who's going to be the star of the show kind of thing. That kind of is going on. So, some people enjoy standing in silence. I have been told indirectly that some people prefer standing in silence because they're basically shy and inarticulate people and they feel they can't involve themselves in the other parts of the process. And interestingly, sometimes it is one and the same person who's telling me both. Sometimes one and the same person tells me that they do appreciate some kind of positive element of standing there in silence, silent protest, but at the same time, they also appreciate the critique I offered, and they really agree with that, and they feel that, yes, there are negative aspects to it. And just following up on that one step further, I got an email back from a guy in Japan who's, again, modifying this Earthlings experience, cube of truth method of outreach and activism. And the first modification they made for a Japanese audience was getting rid of the masks. So this is something I've said again and again and again. How do you think this mask is perceived in different cultures? How would it be perceived in Africa? How would it be perceived in Japan or Thailand or China? And how is it even perceived in the United States of America versus England versus Australia? If we really think about it, even if we're just doing a market research level analysis, not a political or philosophical level of analysis, there's a lot wrong with this particular mask. And in some contexts, it's a question of should you be wearing a mask at all. But anyway, this guy wrote back to me from Japan, and he said, look, they did it on an experimental basis. They tried using the Guy Fawkes mask. They tried using different masks. And they said, look, here in Japan, the response to the masks is really negative. It's really distracting. It trivializes the demonstration. That people seeing it don't take it seriously because they're wearing the mask. He talked about how the reaction was negative, so they really made the decision to do this kind of protest or outreach barefaced, to just stand there with their face exposed, and they immediately saw much more positive engagement. So, interesting word on that from Japan. So the particular group we participated with in Vancouver, there are no masks, and there's nobody standing in a silent vigil. They have an advertising style, big video display, and simply, as a volunteer, you stand there to talk to anyone who's willing or interested to talk to you after they see the gruesome spectacle that's playing constantly on the screen of slaughterhouse footage. And there's a little bit of text on screen, not too much. There are some simple things said on screen indicating that, this suffering can be abolished just by switching to a healthier vegan diet. There are a few written prompts on screen. And you don't get sound. You don't get the sound of the pigs screaming or, pigs, cows, whatever's on screen, which is, again, an interesting choice. A lot of the negative reaction to slaughterhouse footage that I've seen has been because people really feel the sound is disturbing them. And that's very understandable, especially in confined spaces like a subway or a train station where people have to be there, and people have to be there with their kids to have the sound of the screaming of the animals. On the other hand, I think some protesters would say that's exactly what they want. So this particular setup, they were playing music, just anodyne, meaning music that's not related to the video in any way, but otherwise the video was silent. So the very first person to come up and speak to me, and she wasn't particularly interested in me, she just stepped forward and kind of spoke to everyone who was close to her, and I took up the conversation because I was standing close to her. Again, I would say she was either a communist or maybe an anarcho-communist or some kind of anti-capitalist person. This becomes obvious from the very first thing she said, as you'll see as I tell the rest of this anecdote. But it was also striking to me that she was actually wearing the outfit that today identifies you as being a part of the quote-unquote black bloc of protesters. So that's a style of dress that's been around since the 1990s. But it used to be that people would just dress up that way when they were going to a protest. Dress up as a member of the black bloc. That was associated in the past, especially with anarchists, but all kinds of people dress that way today. And, I don't think anyone thought of that as a style of clothing you'd wear 24/7, but obviously now for some people it is, unless she was coming over to talk to us coincidentally. Maybe she just came from some other political protest. If so, she didn't mention it. So she was wearing an all-black hoodie, all-black outfit, exactly the style of clothing that's associated with that political leaning these days. And she looked at the screen, briefly, but I don't know, for 2 minutes or something. And then she said, very sincerely and very directly, she said that she thought the real problem with what was on screen didn't have anything to do with animal rights or veganism. She thought that the problem was capitalism, because all of this only happened because it was being done for a profit, from her perspective, in a capitalist system. So as it happened, I was standing quite close to her, so I got to be the person who reacted to her first. And the first thing I said to her, which I really did try to say in a very affable and disarming way. I didn't say it in an authoritative way or confrontational way. I said, I've lived in communist countries. And this really surprised her. It just did. She was just kind of a little bit boggled at it, said, what? And I said to her, I've lived in 2 different communist countries. I said, in communist countries, the animals die just the same way. The process of where meat comes from, the process of making beef, pork, chicken, milk, the animals die just the same way. And she actually responded to that. Her words were a little bit garbled. I did understand her meaning, but she didn't. She fumbled a few words. She said in a kind of hasty way that, oh, well, that was just a problem with current actually existing communist systems, but not somehow under real communism. And again, trying to be affable and not confrontational. And she did actually respond positively. I mean, she was being very sincere, and she didn't get defensive. So I think I succeeded in being affable in saying this. I said, no, in Russia in 1920, the animals were being killed the same way. In China in 1960, the animals were being killed the same way. Under every communist system, like this isn't just something, as she was suggesting, with recent corruption in communist countries or capitalist influence in communist countries, in every stage of history. And the next thing I said was, she was a little bit stunned. There was a moment of silence after I said that. So I then offered further, this goes back more than 2,000 years. This goes back more than 10,000 years. This isn't a problem with capitalism. This isn't just a problem with industrialization or industrialized society. So, this is a story of centuries and millennia. For all this time, this is where your food has come from. The animals have been dying the same way. Now, I was really expecting her at this point to have a defensive reaction or a dismissive reaction, because I could tell from her very first statement, where she was blaming capitalism, that, this is a real personal conviction of hers, that she's someone who's an anti-capitalist or pro-communist of some kind. And, she really wants to believe that her political ideology would solve this problem, or at least that the political ideology she hates, that the economic system of capitalism, if it were abolished, this would also abolish this problem. But what she said next surprised me, because she said to me quite sincerely and sounding a bit bewildered, so what's the alternative then? How do we solve the problem? And I said to her, the very first word I said back to that was veganism. I said, I've been eating a vegan diet for years. Now, I could have said all of us have, because we had a group of people there who were all vegans. We're all there to do everything, but I just spoke for myself. I said, no, it's totally possible. And her next question after that also indicated that she really was sincere. She wasn't just interested in defending communist or anti-capitalist ideology. She asked, and I do sympathize, it's a sincere question. She said, where do you get your protein? How do you get enough protein? It's sincere enough. And I gave her a reasonably informative answer about that. I said, well, there are plenty of, natural sources like soybeans, black beans, kidney beans, any kind of bean is rich in protein. But I said, if you're too busy to eat to prepare a meal with whole beans in it, there are lots of ways you can cheat. I said, you can buy protein bars. You probably see them at all the grocery stores and what have you. You can buy, the Cliff Bar. That's a vegan brand that has protein and a bunch of other vitamins in it. I say you can cheat. If you're busy and you don't have time to really cook properly as a vegan, you can buy protein powder. You can buy protein supplements. So if you're worried about protein, there are ways to cheat, and there are also ways to get enough protein having whatever you want to call it, a healthy whole foods diet, or what have you. And I just mentioned she did not look healthy. I would say she was at least 30 pounds overweight, but maybe even she had about 50 pounds to lose. She was significantly overweight and young. I mean, she wasn't an older person being overweight that way. So she might also have on some level been interested in improving her health. Well, that's not overtly, what we talked about. So, only a few more words were exchanged after that. Communism has been one of the most popular and the most influential ideologies in the history of the world. So, it is surprising for many of us. You feel that this has been discredited, that it's killed millions of people. How is it possible in 2018 that you meet communists, as I do? I mean, I've known huge numbers of communists my whole life, especially within academia, especially in contexts where left-wing extremism is really kind of celebrated and protected from outside scrutiny. You certainly have to be open to the possibility when talking to communists that they're not interested in cynically making excuses for their ideology, that they're not trying to use their ideology as an excuse for their bad behavior. I've definitely seen that with communists in the past, where they say they believe in liberating the workers, and therefore they don't care about liberating the cows or the chickens or the pigs, that they don't care about ecology or other things, that they just have this Marxist analysis of class struggle, and that's the political struggle they're committed to, and that only. You have to remain open to the possibility that the people you're talking to are sincere and well-intentioned, even if they have signed up for a political ideology as odious as communism. And it's hard. It's not easy. I've literally broken down weeping reading detailed accounts of communist atrocities. And those atrocities are not as well known as the Nazi atrocities. When you say the word Nazi, immediately what comes to mind are concentration camps and gas chambers and eugenics, so on and so forth. When you say the word communist, very, very few people have done the reading, have done the kind of research to know the type of mass murder that ideology really entails, or even to know how ugly the reality is lurking behind euphemisms like class war. That, class war really does mean, students murdering their own teachers. It really does mean people going house to house and, slaughtering their fellow man for being bourgeois. And the definition of who is and who isn't bourgeois is always dangerously vague and susceptible to interpretation, and so on and so forth, not even to get into mass starvation, ethnocide, genocide, and simple looting that came up as part and parcel of the history of communism. Yeah. I've said many, many times on this channel, I did not want to be part of the Buddhist religion anymore in the past when I left Buddhism, because I didn't want to be part of a religion that's built on a lie. And I can still say today, my engagement with veganism, ecology, and other forms of politics in this same way is always about keeping it real with myself and others. It's not always going to turn out well. It may sometimes be emotionally damaging for both parties when you really keep it real, really keep it honest. But yeah, I'm not living a lie one way or another, neither in terms of, the account of my own political commitments, nor in terms of the way in which I challenge others.